What's going on, everyone? This is gonna be this is political ideas and thoughts, or the mindful politics. I don't know if I'm gonna change it or not. And what I'm gonna do for the next little while is make some episodes. Try not to get too political with them for the most part, but I'm going to be basically making very specific episodes on very specific topics. I'm going to try not to, get too, rambly when doing that, so that I can explore with you some other nuances about the topic. And I might do a couple of these. I'm thinking about doing one on libertarianism. Thinking about doing one on, the coronavirus. Might do some other ones. And I'm definitely going to do one on libertarianism, and I'm going to do one on. I'm going to do a couple other ones, but this episode is going to be about a very controversial topic. It's a warning for you right there. So if you are easily triggered by anything, I recommend you leave this video right now, because I'm going to get controversial. So this episode is about abortion, about the many nuances surrounding this topic. And I specifically picked this topic because I don't really have strong opinions about this topic. Because what I've noticed is that I would start an episode, and because I didn't really have a strict, a guideline of where I was going to be going with this episode, I would ramble and lose track of what I was doing, and I'd get caught up in political not necessarily outrage, but so I'm going to be doing things a little different with these episodes. And so this episode is going to be about abortion. So should abortion be legal? That should be your first question. I don't care, but I probably, for the most part, agree, but with some caveats. Mostly caveats being that other options should be available first. Birth control, the morning after pill and things like this. Many people point out that, with abortion, you're killing something that is alive. But we kill something that's alive every day. We eat something that was once alive every day. And so this argument, it may be accurate, may be true, but if we were to apply this argument to everything else that we do, most of us would be vegans, or even being vegan technically, because you're still killing part of something that was alive at one point in time. If you're eating things like eggplant or whatever, fruits is one thing, but the actual plants themselves, which you can eat sometimes, is another thing entirely, which is another subject I might make an episode about. But I'm not going to be just talking about abortion in this episode. It's going to be about several other sort of factors and nuances here. like I said, I specifically picked this topic for several reasons. One of them is because I don't really have strong opinions about this subject. The other is because there's so much else going on right now that I figured it wouldn't, it would be almost a change of scenery of sorts. So to start, when it comes to something like abortion, there are some people who say that the man should not have, have the right to make the decision for the woman. I don't necessarily disagree, but I don't necessarily agree. I think it should be, well, first of all, I think it should be a communal thing where you conversate about it. Ultimately, I think it should be down to what serves the group in that moment. What serves what happens. The woman what the woman wants. But it shouldn't just be about the woman, because the man in some ways is also responsible. Ultimately, I think it should be down to the woman, only because she's the one who's bearing the problems that come with it. But I think it's and at the same time that it should be a communal thing, where you're talking with your partner about this, and trying to find the best solution for both parties, or both people. So, some places nowadays, some states are actually making it really difficult to get abortions and things like this, and I don't necessarily think that's a wise decision, because you're not really getting, you're not really solving the problem. Because you see, the problem here is that you're going, I think that's the main problem with politics, honestly, because we're not looking at things at the structure, and we're not solving things at the structural level. We're going at it from the surface level, so we're not seeing that what we're doing is basically curing the symptoms and not the cause. So I'm almost willing to bet that abortions, the only reason why abortion happens is because of unplanned pregnancy, is because of maybe a condom broke or something like this. First of all, I think the problem with sex is that there's a lot of problems with sex. I wouldn't go as far as religious people do and say that sex is, completely evil and it's like a sin and all this stuff. There are serious problems with it, because I might actually make an episode about this, but because of how survival works, okay, so let me try and explain this. So, survival, number one, survival is not just about surviving, death and things like this. It's not about trying to survive in the physical sense, but it's also about survival of your identities and things like that. Things like this, but it's also about procreating. And so the problem that I have with sex is that because there is so much addiction that's gone into this, because of the way that evolution works, because of the way that survival works, it has a very problematic nature to it. That's one of the problems that I have with these people, and I'm not disagreeing with them for the most part, because I do think that they're kind of right, but they're also kind of missing part of the problem as well. But the sexual liberation people who say sex is good, and, we should try and suppress it and all these things. And while I'll agree, I also have serious problems with this idea to some extent, because I understand something that most people don't seem to understand about sex. Possibly because I don't really have this same addiction that other people have. And the problem has to do with sex and how it relates to survival. Most people don't realize how much of a role this actually plays. You can see this role, though, if you look for it. So I'll give an example of this. And this may not be completely accurate, but this is basically accurate. So when you see a man, hooking up with a bunch of women every day, once a day or whatever, he's celebrated, right? But if a woman is doing the same thing, she's called a whore, a slut, and all these things. There's a reason for this. This is evolutionary based, because if you have a man who is, going out with tons of women and having sex with tons of women, and the chances of the species being, expanded and increased and grown is more likely. But if a woman does this, the chances of the child growing up in a stable environment is very unlikely. And so evolution is playing a part in this. Survival is not something where you go, oh my god, I'm going to die, I have to do something right now. That's not just what survival is about. It's more complicated than this. But because most people don't really understand, survival and evolution, even those who, are scientifically minded, who understand this, don't actually go far enough, because it's not just about sex, it's not just about procreation, it's not just about survival in the physical sense. It's also about identity. It's also about what your mind believes. I mean, survival is way complicated because there's so much that goes into this. I might make an episode about this on this channel, because it would take me several hours to do it, and I don't really feel like doing it on the podcast, because it's one of those topics where you would literally have to do it for 4 hours to cover it, and I would barely be scratching the surface of this problem. And so this is the main problem that I have with sex, is because it has this tendency. It's more of it's not even a tendency so much as it is an instinct. But because it has this instinct built into it, you are going to be reacting and addicted to sex. It's just almost guaranteed, especially if you are not aware of what is happening, not aware of the effects that this has on you. So in a sense, the sexual liberation people are right, because suppressing this doesn't fix it. It actually makes it worse. But in a sense, they're wrong, because it's not just about the survival. It's not just about what I just talked about with sex, but it's also about the responsibility that goes into this, which almost seems to be forgotten or ignored by a lot of these sexual liberation people, because this is an extreme responsibility that you're going into. People just think, oh, I'm just going to hook up with somebody tonight, but they don't think ahead. They don't realize that this is extremely important. This is extremely important, and this isn't something you should just go into, willy-nilly, because your likelihood, your potentiality to make a baby is, it may be decreased with, things like condoms and, whatever other preventative measures there are, but it still is possibly going to happen anyways, because, no preventative measure is 100% foolproof. And so there's such extreme responsibility that it goes into this. That's often ignored, unless you're have morals and whatever. I mean, the problem with morals is a different story, but I might go into that in another episode. So that's the first part of that. So when it comes to abortion, the other reason why I'm for having it legalized is because illegalizing it doesn't really fix the problem. It doesn't really fix the causes of the problem. And as a matter of fact, if the person is willing enough and if they're desperate enough, they're going to find a way of doing it that would be more unsafe than if they were to just have it done legally. Of course, I think there should be other preventative measures first, but of course, because people are so irrational when it comes to sex, because it's such a strong part of their minds, because of evolution, because of survival, they don't necessarily do this. I mean, they may very well do this because most people, I think, have some common sense, but this emotionality when it comes to sex, lust and whatever, it blinds you, and then it creates blind spots. And so when you're doing these things, what normal so-called rationality that you had, disappears, and so you may do things rashly. So there has to be some kind of preventative measure, like the morning after pill, or some kind of birth control. But like I said, no preventative measure is foolproof. You also have to consider too the fact that the woman's life might be threatened by having the baby in some way. There's also the fact of rape, which you can't really account for. So I'm going to go beyond this, right? So I pretty much covered abortion itself, but I'm going to go into some other sort of things kind of related to this, because there's some really extremely wacky views. Some of these newer people, when it comes to abortion, go way too extreme, and literally, almost like a couple of years ago, there was this clip of this guy where they were talking about aborting a baby when it was born. After it was born, literally, the guy was like, they would give birth to the baby, they would make the baby comfortable, and then the doctor and the woman would make this decision on what to do with the baby, meaning that they would euthanize something that's already born. That's a little extreme to me. Of course, it's very possible that it was all taken out of context. It's very possible. That's something that is pretty obvious. That's something that seems to be happening more and more these days. Because so many things are nuanced, and so many people are not so nuanced, and so they don't have, either they don't have the capacity to become, see the nuance, or because what I've noticed is the more emotional you are, the less nuanced you are, the more black and white you are, the more dichotomous thinking you have. It's my my observation. And the less emotional you are, even if you're less emotional, actually, if you aren't really, if you have a belief system, or if you have some political system that you subscribe to, you're still not necessarily going to be nuanced because you haven't really looked into these things. That's one of the problems that we have. One of the major problems we have with politics, honestly. There's a saying that I actually am starting to like more and more. That's basically, like, I'm paraphrasing it, but the root of all evil is ignorance, or something like this. And I think that's actually true. People think that people murder because they're malicious, but they actually murder for different reasons. The problem is that you are using black and white thinking when that may not necessarily be what's needed in this particular case. So, black and white, basically, for those who don't really know, black and white thinking, or dichotomous thinking, is where you only have two choices. George Bush, the second one, has a good example that he made, where he's like, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. It's a good example of what black and white thinking is. There is no middle ground. There's no nuanced thinking here. There's just one way or the other way. My way or the highway, pretty much. And in some ways, Trump is kind of the same way. The media is kind of the same way, because so many people think, the other day, like a week or so ago, I had an argument with somebody that I know about, basically they can believe everything many things that they read. And I explained to them that, this isn't really how these things work, because what you're reading isn't really necessarily what's accurate. They could be deceiving you, not necessarily on purpose, but because they themselves are ignorant on the subject, but because they believe what they're being told, or what they believe to have seen, or even what they have seen, and they interpret it in a certain way and believe that's accurate. They are actually misrepresenting the situation. You'd be surprised how often something happens where something you see happens, and you believe it's something, but it turns out to be completely different than what you believe. This is the problem with black and white thinking. This is what happens when you use black and white thinking. Good, bad, right, wrong. Democrat, Republican. It's one of the reasons why I don't think we should have political parties in the first place. I think we just need a system that doesn't allow for political parties. I'm not really something set in stone with this, but it's one of the things that I've thought about, is that we shouldn't really have political parties, because they don't, they group everybody into other and you, and so you're going to become more tribal in regards to this. So anyways, I made this episode a little rambly, but it's one of the things that I thought would be interesting to talk about. Anyways, this is Political Ideas and Thoughts, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.